Chapter 16. The Klatugak Mirenreg, Liquidator of Interstellar Powers. No ceremony of surrender was conducted for the People's Sovereign Stellar Union. With a declaration by the former nation's final president, the PSSU became no more. The PSSU was the largest interstellar power that the Empire had ever overthrown. For that reason, there were those who believed this called for a magnificent ceremony, but Lafier dismissed the idea. Keeping in consideration the feelings of the citizens of the former PSSU, we shouldn't hold any kind of ceremony. And that sentiment was no lie, though to tell the truth, it was also the case that they were busy enough already, and she didn't want to spend time and resources on pure ceremony. Plus, like a true Nade Dubrisker, she detested such stiff and formal rituals. To her, humoring these restorers of sovereignty was enough. The war wasn't over, after all, and she couldn't muster the mood to make merry midway through it. Officially, Lafier was now the ruler of the territories formerly part of the PSSU. The judiciary was still adjudicating based on the laws of the bygone nation, but the legislature had a new raison d'etre as an advisory organ for her. The administration was now sending agenda items that were once for the president's eyes to Thunderpeel Fleet Command. And it fell to Jin to deal with those. In a truly surprising turn, he was a talented administrative officer. "This is easier than being your adjutant, Lafier," he'd said bluntly. While he was still technically her adjutant, he'd left that work to a subordinate. Right now, he was exclusively serving as a go-between between the government of the former PSSU and Lafier. The final word was always reserved for Lafier, but Jint commented on all of the agenda items with his opinions, and she followed his advice. There had been no issues so far. "I don't mind letting you give it your undivided attention," said Lafier. "You ought to emigrate to Kalgombe while you're at it." But she wasn't being serious, and it was understood that that was just another silly little joke between them, and not least because she didn't intend to allow the government of the former PSSU to continue to exist for much longer. It was only being kept around because, were it to disappear too abruptly, it would cause chaos. That being said, now that the PSSU was no more, the former nation's agencies and institutions were scheduled to be abolished in due time. Jint, meanwhile, was still handling unremarkable, everyday matters for the most part, but the massive undertaking that was the liquidation of a nation had begun. And as a result of that massive undertaking, the former PSSU dispatched a special envoy to the Crown Princess's interim palace. Lafier welcomed that envoy at the Rose Garden. "It has been quite a while, Your Highness," said Special Envoy Janet Macaulay. "I'm happy to hear you're in good health, Ms. Envoy." Macaulay had formerly been an ambassador who resided in the Empire. Once, when Lafier was just a child, they had exchanged a few words of courtesy at some ceremony. Lafier had totally forgotten about her and was only reminded by staff just before their meeting. Naturally, the words they would exchange here and now were of a formal nature. Macaulay voiced a handful of requests, but Lafier didn't make any promises. She was entrusting the practical affairs to Jint. "Kindly consult with the Count of Hyde." The Count of Hyde was standing behind and to the side of Macaulay. "I will hear your requests over there," said Jint, spurring Macaulay amiably on. "We have a few suggestions of our own." And with that, they exited the room. Then Sawbash entered, as though he'd been long waiting for them to leave. Sawbash briefly reported the status of the war. Not much had changed. The Star forces were quietly seizing and occupying the territories of the PSSU, and the Hanian military was still squatting in Emakushi. Is the enemy showing no sign of withdrawing from Emakushi? Exterminating them is possible even with our current force of arms. However, until such time as we receive a new Imperial command, I believe maintaining our current policy is best. "Very well," nodded Lafier. Emakushi could wait. And if that was the case then... Lafier looked at the planar space map projected over her desk, searching for the Wesco portal among the countless portals scattered about. She was waiting expectantly for the Imperial command to retake Lokvakar. "A new transmission has arrived from Central," said Sawbash, though his extremely light tone told her this wasn't important information. "What is it?" "It seems 32 magistrate candidates are headed this way. That should ease up our workload. In the future, nobles would be appointed to the star systems of the former PSSU. But the war was still on and there could be no assurances. Consequently, the emperor became those systems' nominal lord, and magistrates would be dispatched to each system. Until then, military personnel would handle the necessary duties as liege agents. Liege agent work had been foisted on Leifir before. It was nerve-wracking work, and she felt bad making her subordinates do it. Replacing them with bureaucrats who were specially trained for managing the territories would lead to the well-being and happiness of a great many. These 32 had to be the first wave. More such bureaucrats were sure to come one after the other, and together, they would remake the sphere of influence of the former Pisessu into building blocks for the empire. In addition, there was also an unofficial question for you. Are we prepared to accept cats? Cats? Leifir raised her eyebrows. Is this question from His Majesty? Presumably. To the Av, cats were not just lovable creatures. They were a symbol of the commonplace. As they lived their lives aboard spaceships during peacetime, the Av raised their children and kept their pets even while aboard warships. When peace gave way to war, the order all ships, drop off your cats, was issued. And when that happened, objects that were close to the heart but didn't typically see use, and the children being raised aboard ship were among the people and things dropped off to a safer location along with the cats. Even if one didn't have a cat, they would unload everything besides their everyday necessities and prepare for battle, so the command was meaningful for all military personnel. When Training Fleet 3 was formed, Leifir had issued that command, for she interpreted Training Fleet 3 as a combat operational fleet. In actuality, Training Fleet 3 never saw an engagement while it was still Training Fleet 3, but she didn't regret issuing that order. And now she was being asked whether they would take back the cats. What does this mean? Leifir wondered. Is he telling me to settle down in Nov Kinshas? Wait, he never said take back. He's just asking if we're willing to take any cats. If Leifir so wished, she could take a breather from being on the offensive and devote herself to managing the new territories, but needless to say, that wasn't what Leifir wanted. She fixed her gaze on the Wesco portal on the planar space map once again. No, she stated flatly. We can't yet prepare any place soothing enough for cats. For indeed, while she couldn't speak for other cats, the only place fit for cats born in the imperial palace to take their ease was Lokvakar.